Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome back to our ongoing series on the glories of our most beloved Sri Vrindavan Dham. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Pishtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastacha Deshatarane. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're continuing with our mini-series on stimulation for ecstatic love, and this will be part 66. In this lecture, I would like to continue analyzing Krishna conscious poetry, again as a means to awaken our love for Radha and Krishna. So far in doing so, we have discussed the life and poetry of Vidyapati, a medieval poet, who was very much a favorite of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. I'll remind you of the famous verse by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya Lila 10:115. Vidyapati Chandidas Shri Gita Govinda Edina Gita Karna Prabhura Ananda. Sri Swarup Damodar used to read the poems of Vidyapati and Chandidas and Jayadev Goswami's Sri Gita Govinda. He used to make Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu very happy by singing these songs. And by a stroke of good luck, or better yet, an act of mercy, my good friend Hariparsha Das of the GBC Shastra Committee led me to a Shastra entitled Vaishnava Padavali, where the Vaishnav poet, whose name is actually Vaishnav Das, is quoted in his Dana Shri Raga. He writes, "All glories to Sri Jayadev, the crest jewel amongst poetic kings. All glories to Sri Vidyapati, the abode of Rasa. All glories to Sri Chandidas, the great connoisseur of Rasa. These poets are unparalleled in their excellence in the three worlds." The creation of these poets were pristine songs describing Madhurya Ras. These songs were written in prose and verse, and they were relished by my Lord Gaurachandra, along with Rai Ramananda and Swarup Damodar. When Rai Ramananda and Swarup Damodar desired to awaken a particular mood within the Lord, they would sing these songs. Hearing their singing, their poetry, even wood and stones would melt. Such were the sweet pastimes of these three individuals. Those moods and emotions of Sri Radha, which were hidden from the general mass of people, were demonstrated with great effort by my Lord Gaura to one and all. But these rasas do not touch my heart, even on listening to these songs. Thus, Vaishnava Das simply cries. What a humble Vaishnava. So, I was thinking as we discussed Vidyapati last week, let's discuss today the life and poetry of Chandidas. And we'll conclude next week with the life and poetry of Jayadev Goswami. Now, I researched a lot for this talk because historically, some of you may know, there were 4 very famous poets in India named Chandidas. But with the help of several devotee scholars, we were able to determine the original, or the most famous, or we could say our Chandidas, whose poetry Mahaprabhu relished. And apart from his amazing poetic contributions, some of which you'll hear tonight, his life history is equally interesting. I'll begin with that. So this poet Chandidas was born in a Brahmin family at the beginning of the 14th century in the village of Nanura, actually which is the same Bibram district of Bengal, I believe, that Jayadev Goswami appeared. His parents were Shakta, or Durga worshippers. Thus the Acharyas say that Chandidas was initially a materialist because along with his parents, he worshipped the goddess Chandi, or Durga, who was actually one of the most ferocious forms of Kali. Hence his name, Chandidas. It's a full-on Shakta worshipper. Now, it's really interesting. In his purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 5.18.22, Srila Prabhupada writes, the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, clearly states that she does not bestow her favor on any materialistic person. Although sometimes a materialist becomes very opulent in the eyes of another materialist, since opulence is bestowed upon him by the goddess Durga Devi, a material expansion of the goddess of fortune, not by Lakshmi Devi herself. Hare Krishna. So I was reading that Chandidas coined a famous mantra, which is used even today by worshippers of Durga Devi. We used to quote it, I remember, during some of our parikramas here in Vrindavan, when we came across a deity of Durga. And it's a famous mantra. Dhanam Dehi, Rupam Dehi, Rupavati, Bharyam Dehi. It goes like this. O worshipable Mother Durga Devi, please give me wealth, strength, fame, a good wife, and so on. Because there's unlimited material desires, and so on. So Chandidas was engaged in Durga worship, specifically Chandi worship. And naturally, when one worships Durga or her expansions, so much material opulence comes. So it's said, as he was growing up, he lived in a veritable palace. It's also mentioned with a big garden. But I was very interested to learn that his brother was a Vaishnava who worshipped a Shalagram Shila. Yes, kind of, you could say for them, the black sheep in the family. And in those days, Vaishnavas were generally very poor. As such, Chandidas's brother never had any flowers, it's interesting, to offer to his Shalagram Shila. He was that poor. It said he would often look at his brother, Chandidas's garden, which wasn't far away, and complain, my brother has so many flowers, but my Shalagram Shila never gets any. They all go to Chandi. So one day, while this brother was looking at the garden of Chandidas, he mentally offered a flower from that garden to his Shalagram Shila. Now somehow or other, the next day, Chandidas, his brother, picked the very same flower that he offered in meditation and offered it to the demigoddess Chandi, the family deity. And when he did that, she appeared to him. And she said, I'm very pleased with you, Chandidas. What benediction do you want? So Chandidas was like amazed. He said, dear goddess, I am worshiping you every day. Why is it that today you finally appeared to me? So Chandi, the demigoddess, she replied, because you have offered me a flower which has been offered previously to the Shalagram Shila in meditation. By seeing that flower, which became the prasadam of the Supreme Lord, I am pleased with you, and so I have appeared before you. So she identified the Shalagram Shila as the Supreme Lord, as Krishna. So Chandidas said, my dear goddess Chandi, why have you never told me that the Shalagram Shila, who is Krishna, is superior to you? I thought you were supreme. So Chandi smiled and said, my dear Chandidas, you never asked me who was supreme. If you did, I would have replied that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Shalagram, being non-different from Krishna, is thus worshipable. So, when you come in contact with great personalities, you have a change of heart. So when Chandidas heard this, he immediately said, I'm so sorry I've wasted my life. Please excuse me. From now on, I'm going to worship Krishna and his consort, Sri Radha. Do I have your permission? So Chandi said, yes, that will make me very happy. Because she's a demigoddess. She worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Go now and worship the divine couple. It's a wonderful story. Pastime. So after this, Chandidas wrote many, many beautiful poems and songs all about Radha and Krishna. Previously, he was writing about Chandi. He had a change of heart. Some scholars say, I was reading, he wrote more than 1,000 poems about Radha and Krishna. Isn't that wonderful? And he was an accomplished poet. Even before then, he was famous. And how do we know that they were wonderful? Again, as we heard in the beginning of this lecture, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used to listen to those poems and songs when he was in Jagannath Puri, in the Gambhir, in order to experience the higher states of Krishna consciousness. Specifically, he appeared to try to understand, Krishna appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to try to understand the love that Radha had for him, Krishna. So Chandidas was instrumental in that. From the worshipper of a demigod to a pure devotee. But unfortunately, our Gaudiya Vaishnava acharyas say that many people have distorted his poems and songs, not understanding their true meaning and purpose. They compare them to the loving sentiments of materialistic people, like as a boy loves a girl and a girl loves a boy. Therefore, in the book Srimad Bhagavata Tatparya, which contains, 32 excerpts from lectures on Srimad Bhagavatam given by Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur and printed in the Harmonist, and translated by my godbrother Bhumipati Das. Sri Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati comments as a result. He writes, many of our friends have forgotten the subjects pertaining to the Supreme Lord. They imagine Krishna to be an angel or historical personality, and thus they speak in a way that is not for hearing, and they paint pictures that are not fit for seeing. In this way, they are ruining themselves and others as well. These people have distorted Jayadev's and Chandidasa's writings. He says it right there, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Chandidasa's writings, which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu relished in the company of his most intimate associates. Thus they have transformed these transcendental books into objects of their sense gratification. It is very unfortunate and unjust that subject matters meant for discussion by high-class personalities are now talked about by ordinary people that lack the necessary qualifications. He goes on, by proudly attempting to discuss these topics, such people have brought about their own ruination as well as those of others. Hare Krishna. Nowadays, he said, people are only interested in hearing things that appear pleasing to them. For this reason, they like to hear the teachings of impersonalists. It is very difficult to find people who are truly interested in hearing Hare Katha, People who are adverse to devotional service and yet advertise themselves as devotees, as learned scholars, as great renunciates, as qualified brahmanas, or as mayavadis, simply deceive people. By claiming to be devotees or learned scholars, they bring inauspiciousness upon the ordinary people. Unfortunate people thus fall into illusion. Well, that's quite a discourse he gave on that point. And so we, as followers of Srila Prabhupada and followers of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Gorkashore Das Bhaktivinoda Thakur, we feel very grateful, indebted to them, that in modern times, in the age of Kali, by their mercy, we can understand the transcendental nature of Radha and Krishna's loving pastimes. Of course, we're all works in progress. But if you read Krishna book, Prabhupada openly discusses many amorous pastimes of Radha and Krishna, but with the proper purport. And our duty is to repeat in the same way. But we have access to those pastimes. Of course, we're going slowly through the 9 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, which Prabhupada said is the qualification for understanding the 10th canto. In the 9th canto, we hear Aishvarya Bhav. We come to learn that God is very great and very, very small, and we hear about his pastimes and we understand he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead above the modes of material nature. And his pastimes are pure and not touched by the inebrities of this material world. So Prabhupada's leading us by the hand gradually, and we can understand these transcendental subject matters. Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. Oh my, we owe so much to Prabhupada. Everything we owe to Prabhupada. So in that light, let us hear some appropriate work by Chandidas. As we mentioned last Friday, the works of these scholars are very, very deep, but there are also works that are appropriate for us to hear. For example, in the following poem, Chandidas composed, we learned on hearing the sound of Krishna's flute, Sri Radha became very distressed. She loves Krishna, so she hears the flute, so she gets distressed. And she addressed her friend and described chaperone, who happened to be an old lady, as follows. It's really nice, really sweet. "Oh grandmother, who is it that is playing a flute," Chandidas starts off, "on the bank of the river Kalindi, Jamuna? Oh grandmother, who is it that is playing a flute in the groves of Gokula? My body is paralyzed and my mind has become mad. I have made a mess of my cooking, all because of the sound of that flute. Oh grandmother, who is it who plays that flute? What sort of man is he? I shall become his slave and offer myself at his feet. Oh grandmother, who is it that is playing the flute with such joyfulness of heart? Oh grandmother, what offense have I done at his feet? Rivers of tears flow down from my eyes. Oh grandmother, I have lost my soul at the sound of his flute. Is it the son of Nanda playing the flute so sweetly, simply to destroy the tranquility of my mind? I'm not a bird that I can fly to him. Thus let the earth split open, so that I may enter into it and hide myself. Oh grandmother, everyone can see when a forest is on fire, but no one can see my heart, which is burning like the potter's oven. Wow. My heart is drying up with the desire for Krishna. So sings Chandidas, bowing his head to his deity, Bashali. A note here, Bashali is another name for the goddess Chandi, so he still has reverence for her. So wonderful, so sweet. Now here, at this point, the lecture like we did last Friday, just to kind of understand the science of transcendental poetry, I'd like to introduce a poetic technique which Chandidas and other famous poets used, you could say, to decorate their poetry, to make it especially sweet and, awaken emotions deep within our hearts. And once again, fulfill the maxiom, what is it? Kim kavyena kavastasya, kim kandena danush mata, parasya hridaye lagnam nagurnayati yachitira. I just love it. What is the use of a bowman's arrow or a poet's poetry if they penetrate the heart but do not cause the head to spin? If they penetrate the heart but do not cause the head to spin. I mean, like all the way. Hare Krishna. So last week, you may remember, it was a bit technical, but again it's required. We discussed anuprasha. Anuprasha, you remember? Using similar syllables in a poem or a verse. Using them, continuously. Similar syllables. It's a technique poets use. So this week, I'd like to introduce all of you to the technique of ananvaya. Ananvaya. It's called the ornament of self-comparison. Interesting. The ornament of self-comparison. I'll explain. Which literally means that which cannot be compared to anything but itself. That's the essence. That which cannot be compared to anything else but itself. In this technique, a particular object is compared to itself. It's described, thus imparting the author's intent that the object cannot be compared to anything else. It's so wonderful. What else can compare to it? That's the gist. Now, Srila Jayadev Goswami gives an example of this in a verse in his Chandra Loka, chapter 5, text 12, as follows. He writes, when an object finds itself being expressed as both upamana, means the standard of comparison, and upameya, the object of comparison, the resultant ornament is known as ananvaya, or self-comparison. So don't get lost here. We're going to give some examples. And as an example, he writes, now it'll become very clear. The moon is like what? The moon is like the moon. The moon is like the moon. Ananvaya. The moon is like the moon. What can compare to the moon? So poets use this technique. Let's say, make up something here. In the English language, an example of this could be a poem like this. A father is like a father. A mother like a mother. A brother like a brother. There cannot be another. I'm a poet, I didn't know it. A father is like a father, a mother like a mother, a brother like a brother. There cannot be another. I mean, that's very simplistic. It's not anywhere on the transcendental platform like these authors. But Srila Jiva Goswami, now that you have an understanding, gives an example of Ananvaya in his Bhakti Rasamrita Shesha. I found this book. Seek and ye shall find. Bhakti Rasamrita Shesha. In chapter 4, he writes as follows. Now it becomes very clear through their transcendental poetry. Krishna appears effulgent like Krishna, and Radha appears effulgent like Radha. What else can one compare both of them to in order to highlight their qualities? Nothing else, because they're the supreme personality of Godhead. Now, more examples by our acharyas. In his Alankara Kaustuba, 8.233, Shri Kavikanapur defines this Ananvaya in a similar way as did Jiva Goswami. His example is as follows. Having once seen that fawn-eyed Radha like Radha, unparalleled in the worlds, my mind carries even today the deep impression of her sidelong glances, which are unparalleled, like her sidelong glances, which are unparalleled, like her sidelong glances. Such a wonderful example. We'll keep going. Shri Baladev Bijabhushana. I found this book in Vrindavan Research Institute. In his Sahitya Kumudi, Baladev Bijabhushana, 10.6. He quotes another example in chapter 9. That chapter is entitled Kavya Kaustuba. Kavya Kaustuba. He writes, I really like this one. The ocean is as great as the ocean, and the moon is as effulgent as the moon. What a wonderful technique. It's just like you're relishing it. Some other examples of Ananvaya in our Gaudiya Vaishnava literature are as follows. Hari Parshad Prabhu helped me with this part. In Gopal Champu, Purva 2231, we hear, and he gives the Sanskrit, but it's very complicated, so the translation. The wives of the Brahmanas said to Krishna, you should not speak in this way, O Lord. We always say that your good self is as merciful as your good self. Therefore, kindly be merciful to us. You asked us earlier as to what you could do for us. Kindly accept us as your own and make us attain that state of being servants of your lotus feet. So we heard that technique there. And in Gopal Champu Purva 3154, on the moonlit night of the Rasa Lila, the night appeared as effulgent as the night. The arena for the Rasa dance was comparable only to itself. The beautiful-eyed gopis were like themselves, and Krishna too was comparable only to himself. So many examples. A little more. Gopal Champu Uttara 3449. Krishna is the topmost amongst all bluish objects, beginning with the sapphire jewel. He is the king of all greatly beautiful objects. During his marriage, he was bathed very well, and through his naturally variegated effulgence, he conquered even his own beauty. In other words, he was like himself, and there was nobody like him. And finally, the same book, this is Govinda Lilamrita actually, 11.118. Sufficiently endowed with good qualities that give pleasure to Krishna, Sri Radhika can only be compared to Sri Radhika herself. And as the beauty of her bodily limbs defeat the beauty of all beautiful objects of comparison, such as the moon or the lotus, that beauty can be compared only to the beauty of her bodily limbs. Hare Krishna. I think we have enough examples there to properly understand that poetic technique. So one last week, one this week we did, and next week I have a couple more with Jayadev Goswami. We're getting some lessons here in transcendental poetry, which is so much part of our Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition. It's interesting to go into detail. So I thought, let us finish today with another poem by Chandidas. It's also from that book, Vaishnava Padavali. I'll just recite the verses again and not the Sanskrit. It's so nice. Here's Chandidas appearing before us. It's like his heart. He's revealing his heart. Oh dear, what is disturbing Sri Radha's mind? Sitting alone in a solitary place, she doesn't listen to anyone or anything. In her meditation, she always desires to drink nectar from the dark cloud of Sham. Such is her meditation, that even her eyes don't move a bit. Rejecting food and wearing a saffron cloth, she appears just like a great yogini. Unraveling her braids and removing the flowers from her hair, she looks at her loosened hair. With a smiling face, she then looks at the moon. Who knows what she says while raising her hands? Fixed on each other, the peacock and peahen, Krishna and Radha, gaze at each other's necks. Chandidas says that all this is the effect of purvarag, the budding of affection for one another. Remember we discussed purvarag, it means before Radha and Krishna meet. So here in this poem, Radharani's hankering for Krishna even though she hasn't just met him. Right? Chandidas says that all this is the effect of purvarag, the budding of affection for each other. I'll finish there. Wow. So relishable. What else do we want to hear or read or see or look at? The divine couple. Radha Shyam, Vrindavan. Okay, so I'll finish there. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, the revealer of the Nam. Be ready next week, Jayadev Goswami. I'm already researching it. It's going to be pure nectar. Shri Shri Gaur Nitai ki, Shri Shri Krishna Balaram ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Shama Sundar ki jai, Vrindavaneshwari Srimati Radharani ki, Chandidas ki, Gaur Nitai ki, Mayapurdama ki, Shri Krishna Sankirtan Yagya ki, Nitai Gaur Pimanandi, Jai Jai Sisi Radhe, Sham Shri Vrindavan Dham.